Hello, this is the second lecture for Critical Thinking Phil 102. Today we will be talking about statements and arguments. In this section I'll introduce you to critical thinking and logic, and I'll try to talk to you a little bit about what critical thinking is good for, why is it valuable, and then I'll introduce you to statements and arguments. So what is critical thinking / logic? So critical thinking is disciplined thinking governed by clear intellectual standards. This is from the textbook Critical Thinking: A Student's Introduction. What is a clear intellectual standard? Well, one such standard is correct reasoning. And correct reasoning, what is correct reasoning? What is incorrect reasoning? What is a good argument? What is a bad argument? Those are going to be the focus. Those things are going to be the focus of this course. So when I say that logic is the study of correct reasoning, there are two different ways of thinking of logic. One is logic as the study of correct reasoning, and two is logic as the study of how people reason. When I say logic is the study of correct reasoning, what I mean there is that there's a sort of standard for what's good reasoning and bad reasoning, and that's something we should strive for. You know, you can have bad reasoning, and this is a sort of objective standard, and then you could have good reasoning, and that's a sort of objective standard for reasoning. And that's what we mean by logic. Logic is the study of correct reasoning. You know, just like 2 + 2 = 4, if you say 2 + 2 = 5, well, you've given an incorrect answer. And when you say something like there's a form of argumentation called modus ponens, when you say modus ponens is a good form of reasoning, you're saying something that's either true or false. So we're studying, you know, what is good reasoning, what is bad reasoning. That's as opposed to logic as the study of how people reason. This is a more sociological or anthropological study. You know, how do people reason? You go around, you do some polls, you see that people reason in such and such a way, people reason in such a way, and you know that's a project for the sociologist. That's a project for the anthropologist. That's not the project for the logician. That you might call that logic, but really, you know, how people reason, you might call that logic, the logic of the way people think. But that's not what we're talking about when we use the term logic, at least in when you're talking about logic as a subdiscipline of philosophy. Logic is supposed to be the study of correct reasoning. Okay, so what is critical thinking good for? Well, it can make you a better thinker. It can give you, you know, clear thought. It can help you discern problems and solutions to problems. It can help you to think outside of the box. And, you know, this is just good all around. So, you know, being a good thinker, it's going to help you navigate the world better. It's going to help you avoid certain silly mistakes. Okay? And it's also just good in itself to be a better thinker. So studying logic or critical thinking can make you a better thinker. It can also help you with practical considerations. Should I buy this car? Should I take out a loan for this car? Or should I use cash to buy a cheaper car? If you use your critical thinking, you're going to be able to discern what's the right thing to do in that situation. You know, should I take out a $24,000 loan for this car, or should I buy a $2,000 car and then use some of the money left over to repair it if it needs to be repaired? These are all things that, you need clear thinking in order to navigate those practical issues. And it's not just buying a car, it's like every single aspect of human life requires clear thinking in order to make good decisions. It can also help you with moral considerations. Consider the death penalty. Should we have the death penalty in our society? Should we not? Is it morally right, or can it ever be morally right for the government to take the life of one of its citizens? Is capital punishment ever just? Those are the sorts of things that you think through when you're doing ethics, and you can't think through those tough issues unless you're a critical thinker, unless you're a really clear, solid thinker. And the way that you become that is by practice. A good start is by taking this course, critical thinking. And the study of critical thinking, as I already mentioned, is good in itself. Just like knowledge is good in itself. Just like happiness is good in itself. Studying critical thinking is good for its own sake, and not necessarily for anything else it can bring to you, though it can bring all these other things. Okay, so now we'll get into statements. I want to define statements, and then I want to define arguments. I want to go through each of those in some detail. So a statement is a sentence that is either true or false. It's an indicative sentence. Okay, Obama is president, although that'll soon be false. It's true right now. There are 15 million dogs in the United States. Well, that's either true or it's false. Okay? Those are statements. These are sentences that are either true or false. Some sentences are not statements. Is the door open? That's a question. It's not true and it's not false. You're just requesting information. Close the door now. That's a command. That's not true or false. It doesn't even make sense to say, close the door now. That's true. No, you can say the door is closed, and that's true, or you could say the door is open, and that's true. But just to say, close the door, you're not saying anything that's true or false. You're just offering a command. Here's another one. Close doors. Boo. That's emoting. That's saying that you don't like closed doors. I don't know why someone wouldn't like closed doors. Maybe they feel trapped or something. But that sentence is not true and it's not false. Closed doors, boo. It's just laying your emotions on the table there, letting people know how you feel about something. That's not either true or false. It's just an expression of an emotion. So how about this one? The brillig do gimble in the wabe. That's a nonsense sentence. It's not true. It's not false. It's not capable of being true or false. Unless you sort of define those terms, brillig, gimble, wabe, and then maybe it would be true or false, but then it'd no longer be a nonsense statement. So if we go back, we can see that a statement is a sentence that is either true or false. We see Obama is president. That's a statement. It's true right now. It'll be false on January 20th. There are 15 million dogs in the United States. I couldn't tell you whether that's true or false, but it is either true or false. And then you have sentences that are not statements, like questions, commands, sentences that are just emoting, and then nonsense statements. Okay, so I want to give you some practice questions to make sure you understand the difference between a statement and a non-statement. So here's a question for you. Is the following sentence a statement? Joan likes to fish. Yes, it is a statement. It's capable of being true or false. It is true or it is false. If Joan likes to fish, it's true. If she doesn't like to fish, it's false. Okay, so yes, that is a statement. It is either true or it's false. So when I do these practice questions, I'll give you a little bit of time to answer, and then I'll reveal the answer. Okay? And if you want, you could even pause the lecture at that point to give you some time to think about it. And you can really use these to sort of test your knowledge. Okay? How about this one? Is the following sentence a statement? Get out of here. No, it's a command. And commands are not capable of being true or false. Get out of here. That's not true. That's not false. It's just basically trying to get someone to do something. How about this one? What are you doing? Is that a statement? No, it's a question. Questions are not capable of being true or false. The answer is capable of being true or false. For example, I'm fishing. That could be an answer to what are you doing? I'm fishing. And that's true or it's false. But the question, what are you doing? That's not true and it's not false. Okay. So now we'll get into arguments. But before we do, you have to know why we were talking about statements. And it's because arguments are composed of statements. So you need to know what a statement is because arguments are composed of statements. So here you have two characters. There looks like they're having a verbal dispute, a loud, obnoxious maybe argument. And that's just supposed to be funny there. But that's not necessarily what an argument is, yelling at each other. That's one way we often use the term argument, but that's not how we'll use the term argument in this class. Okay, so I have a recommendation for you. It's to click on this link here to watch the Argument Clinic by Monty Python. It actually is very insightful in telling you, giving you a description of what an argument is, what an argument isn't, but it's also funny at the same time. Okay, you don't need to watch it, but I recommend that you do. Okay, so what is an argument? This is a group of statements. Remember, statements are sentences that are either true or false, in which the conclusion is said to follow from the premises. A premise is the information intended to provide support for the conclusion being the main point of the argument. So here's an example. Joan lives in Nevada, therefore Joan lives in the United States. This is an argument. You have one premise, Joan lives in Nevada, and you have one conclusion, Joan lives in the United States. And you have this sort of conclusion indicator word, therefore. Therefore is supposed to tell you that Joan lives in the United States logically follows from Joan lives in Nevada. So this is an argument. And if you think about it, it's a good argument. Given the current conditions in the United States, if Joan lives in Nevada, then she must live in the United States. You've got all the information you need in knowing that Joan lives in Nevada to infer that Joan lives in the United States. So you get an argument which is a group of statements in which the conclusion is said to follow from the premises. And the premise is, or premises, are the information intended to provide support for the conclusion. And the conclusion is the main point of the argument. Alright, so here's a sort of graphical representation of an argument. So you have the premises here, and from the premises it's supposed to follow the conclusion. The premises are the claimed evidence or support, and the conclusion is a claim that is supposed to follow from the evidence. Now, practice questions. See if you can identify a premise and a conclusion in a given passage. Consider the following argument. We should boycott that company because they have been found guilty of producing widgets that they knew were faulty and that caused numerous injuries. Which statement is the premise and which statement is the conclusion? Here you can pause if you need to in order to think about it, but I'll reveal the answer now. We should boycott the company is the conclusion, and they have been found guilty of producing widgets that they knew were faulty and that caused numerous injuries. That's the premise, or it could be two premises depending on how you divide it up. Then you also have the word because in there. The because indicates the relationship between the premise and the conclusion. Such and such because such and such, right? We should boycott the company because they have been found guilty, etc. Because they have found guilty, it follows that we should boycott the company. So, you can infer from the fact that they have been found guilty that you should boycott the company. You know, this might be a good argument, it might be a bad argument. The point of it is, the word because indicates a relationship between the premises and the conclusion. The premise provides evidence for the conclusion. The conclusion is supposed to follow from the premise. Okay, consider the following argument. Socrates is a human. All humans are mortal. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Which statement is the premise and which statement is the conclusion? Socrates is mortal is the conclusion. Socrates is a human and all humans are mortal. Those are the premises. The word therefore indicates that a conclusion will follow. So, if you look at the way the statements are related, Socrates is a human, all humans are mortal, Socrates is mortal, you can just see that the claim Socrates is mortal logically follows from Socrates is human and all humans are mortal. Okay? And you might have even heard this argument before. So, premises provide some sort of evidence or logical support for the conclusion. The conclusion is supposed to follow from the premises. The word therefore indicates that a conclusion is about to come. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. It follows from these former things, or these things that we just mentioned, that Socrates is mortal. Consider the following argument. If all of our actions are determined by forces outside of our control, then we don't have free will. All of our actions are determined by forces outside of our control, thus we don't have free will. Which statement is the premise and which statement is the conclusion? Okay. Actually, there are multiple premises. One premise is, if all of our actions are determined by forces outside of our control, then we don't have free will. Another premise is, all of our actions are determined by forces outside of our control. The conclusion is we don't have free will. The word thus indicates that a conclusion will follow. And if you look at the relationship between the premises and the conclusion, you can see that the conclusion does follow from the premises. If our actions are determined by forces outside of our control, then we don't have free will. Our actions are determined, therefore we don't have free will. Now, that might be a bad argument in that it has false premises, but if the premises are true, the conclusion does follow. That's the end of our slideshow. Let me review what we've done. I introduced you to critical thinking, and then I introduced you to statements and arguments. A statement is a sentence that is either true or false. An argument is a series of statements of which some, the premises, provide support for another or others, the conclusion or the conclusions. Okay, so within an argument you have statements. Some of those are the premises, one of those or some of those is the conclusion or are the conclusions. And the premises provide support for the conclusion. The conclusion is supposed to follow from the premises. That's the end of our lecture. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.